In 2009, the BBC aired a documentary that made headlines around the world. Researchers claimed they had found the skeleton of Cleopatra's murdered sister, and the skull measurements revealed something extraordinary: African ancestry mixed with Greek features. The implication was explosive. If Cleopatra's sister had African blood, then Cleopatra herself might have been part African. Newspapers ran the story everywhere. The theory spread across the internet. It appeared in books, articles, and countless YouTube videos. For 15 years, it was treated as near fact. There was just one problem. In January 2025, scientists finally extracted DNA from that skeleton. What they found did not just challenge the theory, it obliterated it. The skeleton was not Cleopatra's sister. It was not even female. It was not Egyptian or Greek. It was a disabled Roman boy, probably from Italy. This is the story of how a sensational theory fooled the world for almost a century, and how modern science finally exposed the truth. Our story begins in 1929. An Austrian archaeologist named Joseph Kiel was excavating in Ephesus, an ancient city on the coast of modern-day Turkey. His team uncovered something remarkable: a magnificent octagon-shaped tomb unlike anything else at the site. Inside was a water-filled marble sarcophagus, and inside that sarcophagus was a complete human skeleton. The tomb's architecture was extraordinary. It resembled the famous Pharos Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Whoever was buried here was clearly someone of immense importance. But there was a problem: no inscription, no name, no grave goods to identify who this person was. Kiel examined the skull and made his assessment. He declared it belonged to a very distinguished personality, a young woman roughly 20 years old. The skeleton was removed. The skull was sent to Vienna for further study. And for decades, the mystery of who lay in this magnificent tomb went unsolved. Fast forward to 1990. An Austrian archaeologist named Hilke Thur had been studying the Ephesus tomb for years. She connected the dots and proposed a stunning hypothesis. She claimed the skeleton was Arsinoe IV, Cleopatra's younger sister. If you do not know Arsinoe's story, here is what you need to understand. Arsinoe was one of 5 children born to Ptolemy XII, the pharaoh of Egypt. When their father died, a brutal power struggle erupted. Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy XIII fought for control of the throne. Arsinoe chose a side. She allied herself against Cleopatra and led a siege against her own sister during the Alexandrian War in 48 to 47 BCE. It did not end well for her. Julius Caesar captured Arsinoe and brought her to Rome. She was paraded through the streets in golden chains during Caesar's triumph. The Roman crowd, moved by her youth and dignity, wept for her. Caesar spared her life. She was sent into exile at the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus. But Cleopatra never forgot, and she never forgave. Years later, after Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra became the lover of Mark Antony, and she made a request: kill my sister. In 41 BCE, Roman soldiers dragged Arsinoe from the sacred temple and murdered her. She was probably in her mid-20s. Thur's theory seemed to fit perfectly. A magnificent Egyptian-style tomb in Ephesus. A young woman's skeleton. The right time period. The pieces appeared to align. The theory gained traction in academic circles, but it was about to explode into the mainstream. In 2009, the BBC released a documentary called Cleopatra: Portrait of a Killer. The filmmakers made a sensational claim. They said that skull measurements from the Ephesus skeleton showed signs of African ancestry mixed with classical Greek features. Here is where it gets complicated. The actual skull had been considered lost since World War II. The researchers were working from notes and photographs taken in the 1920s. Measurements recorded almost a century earlier, but that did not stop them from drawing sweeping conclusions. If Arsinoe had African ancestry through her mother, and if she and Cleopatra shared the same mother, then Cleopatra herself might have been part African. The media went into a frenzy. Headlines screamed around the world: Cleopatra had African ancestry. The face of ancient Egypt's most famous queen needed to be reimagined. The theory took on a life of its own. It appeared in books, it spread across social media, it became part of the cultural conversation about race and ancient history. For 15 years, millions of people accepted it as established fact. But some scholars were deeply skeptical from the very beginning. Even before any DNA was extracted, respected academics had raised serious objections. First, there was the inscription problem, or rather, the complete lack of one. The tomb had no name, no identification whatsoever. For a royal princess, this was extremely unusual. Second, there was the age discrepancy. The skeleton appeared to be 15 to 18 years old, but Arsinoe was in her mid-20s when she was murdered. The bones did not match the history. Third, there was the mother question. Ancient sources suggest Cleopatra and Arsinoe may have had different mothers. Even if Arsinoe did have African ancestry, it would not necessarily tell us anything about Cleopatra. Fourth, there was the methodology problem. The skull measurements were taken in the 1920s using outdated techniques. Modern scientists agree that race cannot be reliably determined from skull measurements alone. And fifth, there was the lost skull. The actual physical skull was missing. All conclusions were based on century-old notes. Cambridge classicist Mary Beard publicly criticized the documentary. She pointed out that the ethnic argument largely went out the window given these problems, but her objections were drowned out by the excitement of the headline. The theory persisted. Until December 2022, researchers made a remarkable discovery at the University of Vienna. While examining collections in the Department of Evolutionary Anthropology, they found a skull with a yellowed note attached. The note read simply, "Skull from Ephesus." The lost skull had been sitting in a university collection for decades. Misplaced, forgotten, waiting. For the first time in nearly a century, modern science could examine the actual remains. Not old photographs, not faded notes, the real skull. An international team assembled. Anthropologists from the University of Vienna, geneticists from the Austrian Academy of Sciences, orthodontists, dating specialists, experts from the Austrian Archaeological Institute. They deployed every tool available to 21st century science. Microcomputed tomography scanned the skull at 80 micrometer resolution, revealing internal structures invisible to the naked eye. DNA was extracted from the cochlea and petrous bone, the areas that preserve ancient genetic material best. Radiocarbon dating with modern calibration techniques established when the person lived. Geometric morphometric analysis compared 23 cranial landmarks against 42 geographically diverse skulls. The results arrived in January 2025, and they were devastating. The first finding was the most shocking. The skeleton had a Y chromosome. In other words, it was male. The supposed Princess Arsinoe IV, whose skull measurements had been used to argue for Cleopatra's African ancestry, was not a princess at all. It was a boy. Lead researcher Gerhard Weber described the moment of discovery. Repeated tests confirmed the presence of a Y chromosome. The boy was between 11 and 14 years old when he died. But the revelations did not stop there. DNA analysis showed the boy's ancestry was not Egyptian and not Greek. Population genomic analysis revealed the highest genetic similarity was with the central Italian peninsula and Sardinia. His mitochondrial haplogroup, a genetic marker passed down through the maternal line, has been found in Bronze Age Germany, Etruscan Italy, and Punic Sardinia. This was a Roman boy, probably from Italy, buried in an Egyptian-style tomb in Turkey. The skull also revealed something the researchers in the 1920s completely missed. This child had been severely disabled. The left occipitomastoid suture of his skull was completely fused. This suture normally does not fuse until after age 65. In this boy, it had fused during childhood, causing his skull to develop abnormally. The asymmetry was extreme. When compared against the entire sample of 42 skulls from around the world, this boy's skull was the most asymmetrical, more than 3 standard deviations from the mean. His upper jaw was severely retracted and abnormally inclined. His first molar showed 0 wear, meaning he never used it for chewing. He could not eat normally. The researchers noted signs of possible vitamin D deficiency around the time of his birth. He may have suffered from a condition similar to Treacher-Collins syndrome, which causes facial deformities. To see straight ahead, he would have needed to hold his head at an extreme angle. This was not, as researchers in the 1950s described, evidence of a refined or specialized person from the ancient world of high culture. This was a child who struggled through a short, difficult life. The implications were immediate and total. The entire basis for claiming Cleopatra had African ancestry has now been demolished. The skeleton was never Arsinoe IV, never female, and never Egyptian or Greek. The 1920s skull measurements that supposedly showed African features were measurements of a developmentally disabled Roman boy. The 2009 documentary was wrong. The headlines were wrong. The theory that spread across the internet for 15 years was built on a foundation of misidentification and wishful thinking. Every article, every video, every social media post that cited the Ephesus skeleton as evidence for Cleopatra's ancestry was citing evidence that never existed. So what do we actually know about Cleopatra's ancestry? The honest answer is less than we would like. Scholars generally agree on a few things. The Ptolemaic dynasty was Greek and Macedonian in origin. It was founded by one of Alexander the Great's generals after Alexander's death. The Ptolemies practiced extreme inbreeding to keep power within the family. Cleopatra had only 6 great-great-grandparents out of a possible 16 because of brother-sister marriages. Her coefficient of inbreeding was approximately 45%, higher even than the famously inbred Spanish Habsburgs. Through intermarriage with the Seleucid dynasty, Cleopatra had some distant Persian and Sogdian ancestry. But here is the crucial point. Cleopatra's mother is not definitively identified in any ancient source. We simply do not know who she was. This is an important unknown, and no tomb of Cleopatra or any Ptolemaic ruler has ever been found. Direct genetic testing on Cleopatra herself remains impossible. Anyone who claims to know Cleopatra's exact ancestry is speculating. The Ephesus skeleton was never going to answer that question. Now we know it could not have, because it was never her sister in the first place. The 2025 study solved one mystery, but it created others. Why was a disabled Roman boy buried in such a magnificent Egyptian-style tomb? Who was his family? They must have been wealthy and powerful to afford such an elaborate burial. Was the tomb originally built for someone else, perhaps even for the real Arsinoe IV? And if so, where are Arsinoe's actual remains? As the researchers noted, the search for the remains of Arsinoe IV can now be resumed, free of rumors. The real princess is still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. For almost a century, a skeleton in Turkey was mistaken for a murdered princess. For 15 years, that mistake was used to make sweeping claims about one of history's most famous women. Millions of people believed the theory. It appeared in documentaries. It spread across the internet. It shaped how people thought about Cleopatra in ancient Egypt. It was all based on a lie. Not a deliberate lie, but a lie nonetheless. A cascade of assumptions built on incomplete evidence, outdated methods, and wishful thinking. It took modern DNA science to finally expose the truth. The skeleton was not Cleopatra's sister. It was not even female. It was a sick child from Roman Italy who died far from home and was buried, for reasons we may never understand, in a tomb fit for royalty. The lesson is simple but important. Sensational historical claims based on incomplete evidence can persist for decades. They can spread around the world. They can become accepted as fact, until science catches up. The Arsinoe theory is dead. The search for the real princess continues. And the true story of Cleopatra's ancestry remains, as it always has been, a mystery waiting to be solved.